Hello, everyone. I'm super excited and happy to welcome you to today's tips and tricks session here in modeling and, of course, to Onshape Live 22. My name is Michael Falkensteiner, and I'm not alone today. With me is my colleague, Paul Simon. Paul and I are part of the technical services crew here in Europe. A short introduction to this session. Well, modeling is a core task for every designer. Engineers love to create and turn their ideas into innovative products. Onshape makes CAD fun again. So we don't have crashes, we don't have installs, you don't have a save button, you have unlimited undo redo, branching and merging, seamless updates, rendering now, and more. So fearless innovation is guaranteed. In this session, we have prepared about 30 tips and tricks to help you create models faster, easier, and more stable. But before we get started, I would point out to the Learning Center in Onshape. It is always worthwhile, even for experienced Onshapers, to go there and learn new skills or discover areas you may not have had much exposure to in your career. A brief overview of the agenda for this session. We kick things off with section views in the 3D environment and how to use these section views in practice. As a second point, I would like to present some tips and tricks for imported parts and assemblies. It happens, of course, again that CAD data from outside has to be brought to Onshape. And I will share with you some tips and tricks that help you to easily use this external data within Onshape. One of my personal favorites from the features implemented last year is the Parametric Replicate feature. I'm going to show you how it works in combination, of course, with some other tips and tricks. At this point, I will hand it over to Paul. In an entertaining and compressed session, Paul's going to show you many tips and tricks in the sketcher that have been shared with the Onshape community by Onshape users in our forum. So basically the content is you that created the content. Collaboration with others is with Onshape easier and more secure than ever before. So to free designers from the communication silos of traditional file-based CAD systems, Paul is going to show you in his part of the session how the sharing feature in Onshape can be used to communicate meaningfully in real time directly on the native 3D model. But let's get started with the first topic. So section views are a common way to show the inner workings of a machine, like in this example here, an old Boxer engine. Well, it's not just about making a simple cut through a design or a machine in order to display some parts. No. It's really about providing information for the designer himself as well as for third parties. Well, who might need access to an Onshape document or to gain understanding of the functionality of a design. And therefore, it's a good idea to combine section views with transparency of parts or animation and to make them reproducible. Because who knows who will need them and who knows when. But let's dive into Onshape because this is the reason why we're all here for. Well, in this model here, first let me create a section view. The face on the fan up front here fits very well, so let me cut about the middle of the engine. The recently added feature of excluding parts from section views fits perfectly in this use case here. Simply select the parts, either in the graphics area or in the instances that should be excluded, and they will then be displayed and the section view is not cut. And my tip for you, if this view state should be reused later, you can save the view under named views. Not only the isometric view of the geometry, but also the section view state will be saved. And do not forget to assign a meaningful name for all your features and section views and everything. But let's start the engine. So for this, I search on the left side under the made features, the right feature that I want to animate. And here is my next tip for you. You may have a complex animation where many parts are dependent on each other. To find the master-made feature that drives the whole machine, like in this case the crankshaft, give it a name that stands out like I do here with stars and capital letters. Not only is it easier for me to find it again, but it's also easier for someone unfamiliar with the document to find. All right, let me bring back the view I've created earlier, including the section view, and start the animation. And the little tip here with the steps in the animation dialog window. So let's start the animation here. So you can adjust the speed. The less steps, the higher the speed, and the more steps, the slower the engine runs. Okay, so let's play. You see the engine is running. So section view states can section view is active, and even during the animation, you can pan, zoom, or rotate without stopping the animation at all. And my next tip for you, even without an active section view, the displayed view can be changed during animation is running. So let's start the animation again. And while the animation is running, simply right-click on one of the parts in the graphics area, and you can make them transparent. Now, this can, of course, be done with multiple parts and gives a good view of the inner workings of this machine here. So the engine is still running, and section views can be dynamically placed through the assembly without interrupting the animation at all. As you can see here, the excluded parts from before are still excluded, so it saves the state. And any numbers of these views in combination with sections can be created to show details in complex assemblies in a reproducible way. All right, well, let's move on with the next topic here. In real life, not all parts are always designed in Onshape. Keyword is here standard parts or purchased parts. Some of them have to be imported into Onshape from outside and sometimes even adapted. And I would therefore like to share two workflows with you. The first workflow shows how to convert imported sheet metal parts into native Onshape sheet metal parts. And the second workflow is how to use a simple trick to fill in metadata in a very easy way when importing data from archive or legacy systems. So back in Onshape here, let me import a sheet metal part as a step format from my local hard drive here. So my first tip for you, once the upload and conversion process in Onshape is complete, a link appears in the notification panel. Well, clicking on this link opens a document or the tab and takes me directly to the imported geometry. And as we know, there is only one feature, the import feature, but I would like to edit this part and further mainly get the flat view out of it. So how do I now convert this part into a native Onshape sheet metal part? Well, there's only one feature needed for this, the sheet metal model feature. Select the thicken option and very importantly, specify the correct sheet metal thickness, otherwise it won't work. Select the option of tangent propagation, then click on any face. So I may have to flip the direction here. And as a result, we get a second part in this part studio in this multi-body environment with the exact same geometry and additionally the behavior of a native Onshape sheet metal model. My next tip for you is to keep the studio uncluttered. And to do this, delete the imported part to avoid confusion when you try to import this in other documents or in other assemblies. The native sheet metal model, including the flat view, remains and can be edited as usual if needed. Okay, well, to the second workflow. Let's jump to the assembly and open the Bill of Material flyout menu on the right-hand side. The bill of material for this assembly is not completely filled out yet. The part numbers and the revision states, as you can see here, are missing. Now, a simple workflow and how I can bring this metadata into Onshape. Usually, bill of material formats are exportable in the form of a CSV file from data management systems. Open the CSV file with an Excel or a Google Sheet. And inside there, select the values you want to transfer and just copy them. It is important to copy only the values without the head, otherwise it won't work. Now mark the field in the Onshape bill of material where the value should be entered, like for example here the part number field, and then press Command or Control V, and these values are simply pasted into this bond here. The metadata is automatically filled in and assigned for all parts and subassemblies. Well, this easy workflow makes it possible to import metadata of complete assembly structures from legacy systems with very little effort. Up to my next tip. So have a look at the instances list on the left-hand side. All parts as well as subassemblies reference the main workspace, but how do I get back the release state for all the instances in a quick way? Well, there's an alternative workflow that I want to share with you. Change detection, the release dialog can be used to switch to the release state. So as a first step, proceed as if you want to release the assembly, which we will not in this case. Change detection in the release dialog window will tell me for most of the parts here that no changes have been made since the last release. So I press the Revert Items to Last Revision button here for all or for just individual objects to bring back the last release date. Now just close the window by clicking close. Just close it. Don't release anything. And in the instances list, we now suddenly see many black triangles indicating that release parts and assemblies are referenced here, and that's it. So it's just an alternative for how to bring that way back in a quick way. One of those features we added over the last year, and there are, as you know, new features in Onshape about every 3 weeks, was the parametric replicate feature in Assemblies. Well, I decided to introduce this feature today because it can be used by almost every Onshaper, so it's not a special surfacing feature, a special sheet metal feature, so it's a very generic feature. Of course, I will show it and explain it, but also, of course, combined with a few tips and tricks that I want to share with you along the way. So back to Onshape with this model of a piston pump. This is the main assembly, so switch over to a part studio where just some parts of this assembly have been created. I'm still missing some holes here on one side and I would like to add them. Well, a colleague has already created holes like this here, for example, and I want to take over this hole, the size, depth, standard, everything. But how do I select it because it's hidden by geometry? Well, my first tip. Just hold down the Alt or Option key on your keyboard and Onshape now selects you elements that are hidden by geometry. When selected, the feature is of course also graphically highlighted in the feature tree on the left-hand side. On the opposite side of the part, the exact same hole should be created in the transparent part coincident with the already visible holes. And here is my tip for you. Select the already existing hole, choose Edit. I want to take over all the values. Now pay attention. Instead of closing the feature dialog window, I press the key combination Shift and Enter on my keyboard. This closes the dialog window and creates a new hole feature on the fly at the end of the feature tree, with all the values taken over from the previous feature. And of course, that works with every feature, not just the whole feature. Super nice, I love that. Well, my next tip. Use made connectors as a placement for holes. It offers you much more flexibility. I don't have a sketch here or sketch points, but the made connector of the hole is perfect. Again, hidden, but again, holding down the Alt key or Option key lets me select the hidden mate to place the new hole. And I'm done here. Values are fine, so I can close the dialog window and the hole is added. So let's jump back to the assembly. A screw in the assembly is already inserted here to connect the cover to the housing here. But the rest of the screws are still missing. So select the screw or the element to be replicated and select the parametric replicate feature. Selecting geometry, actually selecting the geometry before you select the feature is often a faster way in Onshape. Well, in this case, I'm asked for face, so face is required, and Onshape automatically finds all the matching hole and inserts the screw along with the correct mates at all the matching positions. This saves me from having to pattern or something like that. Because as soon as something is changed in the hole pattern, for example, irregularities are brought into the hole pattern, a simple part pattern reaches really its limits. For example, here in the part studio, well, let's jump back to the part studio, yes, and I retrieved some previously deleted holes to create an irregular pattern. Okay, so I just delete some holes to demo this, how it works. And back in the assembly, the parametric replicate feature detects all the holes and increases or decreases, it depends of course, the number of screws, install them in the correct position, and my bill of material is also up to date in terms of number of screws. All right, well, in Onshape there is a saying. If you haven't used Onshape recently, you haven't used Onshape. And that's just true. Onshape is really updated about every 3 weeks with you don't have to do anything. You don't have to install anything with no effort, no downtime, fully automatic. And I encourage you to take a look at our forum at forum.onshape.com. It's a highly active place for Onshape users as well as Onshape staff exchange ideas, ask questions, show tips and tricks, share and explain their custom features, or create or vote for improvements. Check out the What's New forum post about every 3 weeks in order to stay up to date with the latest features and functionality in Onshape. And my last point that I want to show you is, or has something to do with those 3 weekly updates before I hand it over to Paul. So back in Onshape here, so the version history tree is open. So when restoring or branching from an older version, you may know the notification to update your document to the latest feature library in order to use the latest Onshape features. And with these frequent updates, it is of course very likely that older versions have been created with older Onshape feature libraries. So when creating here this branch from a previous version, I'm asked if I want to update the document now or later. If I choose now, the window will gray out, as you can see, and not be editable until the document is updated. And here is my tip for you. Usually the update process doesn't take long. You don't have to go back to the document overview page or so. Just do nothing else and watch the notification panel in the background. As soon as the document is updated, well, it's updated, it says it took 0 minutes, so that means below a minute, under 60 seconds. The notification panel in the background changes and shows a successful update. So all you have to do now, just refresh your browser window and you can continue working with the latest functionality in Onshape. And that's it. That's it for my tips today. I hope there was something for you, and I'm super excited what Paul has to show. So Paul, if you don't mind, share your screen and take it away.
Yes, I'm here. So I cannot start sharing the screen. It's weird. Let me just try it again. Now, you need to stop sharing before, and then I will be able to share.
Done.
Let me share now. Yeah, you should be able to see my screen, right?
You can.
Yeah. So, of course, I'd like to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Paul Simon, and today I will be focusing on two main topics, which are sketching and collaboration. The first topic is really for those who have spent some time in Onshape and are looking for ways to speed up their sketch design, and also ways to better reflect their design intent. And as you can see, there are quite a few tricks that I want to share with you today. So let's get to it and start with some sketch magic. The first 3 tricks I want to share with you are 2D chaining, sketch patterns, and select constraint first. 2D chaining is something you will see in Sketch in a few different places, but my personal favorite is really when creating an offset. If you're using the offset command, the ability to automatically select an entire chain of sketch geometry by just clicking and dragging is a very big one to know. Sketch patterns is also something I truly wanted to have in this presentation because to me, it is one of the most underrated features in Onshape. It can actually handle certain situations that feature patterns cannot. So I would like to discuss with you how flexible it can be, because I think it allows you to do a lot of things that you might not be immediately familiar with. And last but not least, the ability to select constraint first. It's very straightforward, but I think it can be a real time saver if you find yourself adding a lot of the same constraint over and over again. So let's move over to Onshape and take a bit of a look. For these 3 first tricks, I'm going to use this cool muffler design. So let's start by editing this offset sketch right there. You can use the N key to jump normal to the sketch plane. And you will see that I'm using a lot of keyboard shortcuts when I work in Onshape. And actually, this is probably the best tip I could give you today. If you use keyboard shortcuts, you will drastically improve your efficiency. For example, here, I could use the C key to start creating a couple of cycles. And I have one bonus tip for you here. You can add dimensions as you go. It's a very fast way of adding a lot of dimensions quickly instead of doing that in the second step, with a dimension tool. So let's define 8 for this diameter. Now, if you want to apply constraints in Onshape, you have 2 options. You could select the entities first. So I could pick both entities and then pick the coincident constraint from the toolbar. And I can repeat this process for each of the cycles. But if you have to apply a lot of the same constraint over and over again, you might want to use the second option, which is to select the constraint first and then select the entities. And this way, you don't have to go back to the toolbar all the time. You can also use the S key to bring up the shortcut toolbar and access your favorite commands from there. So if I want all these cycles to be equal, for example, I could just customize the toolbar to make sure that this command is available from there. And it's especially useful if the command you're looking for doesn't have a keyboard shortcut. Now, let's say that I want to offset this entire chain of sketch entities that I have here, all these lines and arcs. I can use the shortcut O to activate the offset command. And now if I left click the different pieces of geometry, I'm going to get an offset of just these pieces of sketch geometry. But what if I want to offset dozens of lines and arcs that are all connected? How do I do that? Right? I don't want to left click each individual entity. So I could maybe Windows select entities, but it only handles a single chain at once, right? So I would have to unselect the cycles to get my offset. You could use maybe the tangent connected edge selection. That could be also another option. But my tip for today is to use the left click drag option. If I left click drag an entity, it automatically grabs the entire chain of sketch entities, and then I can enter a precise value, maybe for my offset here. So this is my first tip for today. Now let's just remove those cycles, and let's confirm the sketch, and we can maybe create some geometry with this sketch that we just created. I've created already a couple of features, but I can just unsuppress to get my geometry here. All right, so let's move on to another document and discuss sketch patterns. So what I want to do here is create a linear pattern of this sketch geometry. And to do that, you just have to select the geometry. Let's select it and pick the command from the toolbar. So it gives me my pattern. By default, I have 2 pattern instances, and I have these arrows and manipulators that I can drag. So I could, for example, drag this down. I can drag it up. I can also go in the other direction if I want, and I could define a precise value, let's say 50. So I can really set it up the way I want. And then when I'm done, I can just confirm the pattern. But what you might not be aware of is how much you can edit it once the pattern has been confirmed. So for example, if I want to unconstrain the distance between instances, I can just delete those dimensions. And now I can freely drag around this pattern. You can also modify the vertical and horizontal lines. So I could constrain this constriction line, for example, and say, I want it to be horizontal. And now my pattern behaves again differently. The vertical line doesn't have to be vertical either. I could just remove this constraint. And now this pattern can move out to the side, which allows me, for example, to create an hexagonal pattern by adding this extra constriction line. And then I can just pick all these lines and make them all equal. And again, I'm going to get a very different behavior. One thing I want to stress here is that you don't have to drive a pattern by the distance between instances. You can delete the dimensions as we did before, and then you can replace with maybe something that better reflects your design intent. Maybe I want to drive this pattern by the dimensions between these 3 instances here. Right? And it doesn't stop there. I can still add instances to my pattern. I can do that, of course, on both directions. And once I've done that, even if I come here and start deleting instances, it will still maintain the integrity of my pattern. Right? I can also set them to constriction geometry if I want to. And even after that, I can still come back and edit the instance count. Right? So I can maybe reduce the number of instances. I can do that in both directions. And again, the integrity of my pattern is maintained. I could add more if I wanted to. So what I want you to remember here is that the sketch pattern command is very flexible, and you can really tweak it to perfectly fit your design intent. All right. So let's move on to our next tip. The next tip is the ability to assemble and make sketches in Onshape. And I wanted to stress this because the question very often comes up. Can I insert a sketch and start mating my parts to the sketch and use it as a way to drive everything? And the answer is yes, you can definitely lay out an assembly based on the sketch. And then you can use in-context relationship to modify parts based on this layout sketch, and have a layout sketch not just drive the location of parts, but the size of the geometry as well. Now, you will see in the demonstration that using sketches in assembly is especially useful when the design parts have movements, and when these movements kind of drive the design as well as the dimensions for parts. So let's jump back into Onshape with an example of how to use these sketch blocks. I've started this engine design with the master sketch. So the idea is really to be able to define the most important dimensions of the engine in one single location. And then using this master sketch as a base, I have created a few other sketches that represent the different parts of the engine. So I have my crankshaft, my connecting rod here, the piston, and the cylinder. And to do that, the only thing you need to do really is to create a few sketches and project the master sketch entities with the use tool. Now, To animate the motion of the engine using these 2D sketches, I've inserted them into my assembly, and I've defined the relationship between them. As you can see, I've created a couple of revolute mates here. So I could start dragging around the elements and see how the parts interact between themselves. You know, I can move the crankshaft, can move the connecting rod, I can move the piston as well. And as you can see, there is one mate missing here between the piston and the cylinder. So let's just add this mate. We want a slider mate between these two. And just one piece of advice I can give you on that is that one mate should always be enough. If you find yourself using more than one mate, then there is probably another way to do it more efficiently in Onshape, right? Now that all the mates are defined, let's animate the assembly and see what happens. And we can immediately see that there are some interferences here between my parts. Now, the advantage of this is that we can actually go back to the sketch blocks and edit the master sketch. So I could maybe add some dimension. Let's add, let's say 10 here. I could maybe just drag some entities around. I could even use variables to drive my design. So I could use my diameter variable here to drive the dimension of my crankshaft, for example. I also have a piston height variable to drive the height of the piston. And maybe I want the piston diameter to be a fraction of the piston height. So I could say, for example, I want the diameter here to be 80% of the piston height. So you can also use operations with variables. And notice that my sketch is still not fully defined because I still have blue entities, as you can tell. So let's add another dimension. Let's define the gap between the piston and the cylinder, maybe. And we can use another variable to do that. Just one comment on variable. A variable can be set to anything, right? You can create a variable with whatever name you want. You can give it any value you want, and then you can reference it anywhere in your design. And they can even be used for equations. So yeah, very powerful tool that you can also leverage in Onshape. So let's go back to the assembly and let's see the impact of our changes. Of course, it's all updated and I can animate again. And as you can see, there is no interferences anymore. So this method is great to iterate on mechanism and make sure that your geometry is correct before you use it to actually generate your parts, right? Let's go back to the slides. The next trick I want to talk about is actually a trick that I learned from a customer. This customer was importing a lot of DXF logos. And sometimes, as you've probably already experienced, the imported profile comes with open contours, right? And it can be very tedious and time-consuming to find those gaps and close the profile. So what I want to show you today is a very simple trick to help you find those open contours and quickly repair your imported DXF. And then we will also look at the transform and copy sketch commands that are, in my opinion, very powerful in Onshape. So let's move back to Onshape. So the first thing I want to do here is import DXF into a sketch. To do that, you can use the insert DXF or DWG command from the ribbon. And it will list, of course, all the DXF that you've previously imported in your document. In this example, I want to insert this logo. And as you can see, when you do that, you get import errors. I get import errors here. So the S of the logo, as you can see, is not closed. And you can tell that because when it's closed, you get a gray face that looks like the N or the H here. So the way to diagnose this would be to go and find somewhere where there is a small hole in the perimeter. So I would have to go through all these points and examine them. But of course, that could be very time consuming. So the trick here is to start slicing across the profile to narrow down the search area. As you can see here, this area is now closed. Let's add another one over there. And it's closing too, of course. I could add another one here. Right. And so it has to be now one of these points here, right? So let's check those points one by one. And there it is. Here is the little gap, right? So I can just close this. I can delete the lines, and that's done, right? My problem is solved. I repaired my DXF, okay? Now that you've repaired the DXF, you can use it to do a lot of things in Onshape. You can emboss or cut the design. So let's do that, right? I have a cool headphone data set right there. And let's say that I want to customize it with my logo. So I can start by editing my logo sketch that I've already prepared for the demo. And And one bonus tip I have for you here is that you can use the N key on your keyboard. So you already know that. But you can also, if you hit it a second time, it's going to flip the normal view. Right? Could be useful as well. Now let's just insert a logo. We could select the command from the ribbon, but again, you can also use the shortcut toolbar to access it. And let's insert it. Now, when inserting a DXF, the scale is usually not correct. Right? So what I like to do to control the size is to create a construction line that is vertical to the left and right ends of the logo. So I could use my keyboard shortcut L and Q to create a construction line. And then using the guides, as you can see, I can create a line between these two ends. And as you can see, I get my vertical constraints instantly using this, right? You can dimension the line, of course, to the desired state. And of course, the first dimension, as you would expect, scales the entire sketch. It looks a bit too small, so I can still change that because it's still the first dimension of the sketch, right? So now it looks good to me. Next thing I want to do is to transform the logo and move it to a precise location. So let's use the transform command. I've added this again to my shortcut toolbar. I really like to work with the toolbar. And as you can see, as soon as I do that, the triad manipulator appears. And one tip here that I can give you is that you can move this triad manipulator by selecting the dot and snap it to a relevant point, for example, this S here. And then you can drag the whole logo and snap this point to a specific location. For example, this point that I have right here. So let's do that. I can drag the logo until it snaps to my desired location. Now, with this logo, I could cut into the outer cut here, this red part that you can see here. So let's just confirm the sketch and cut the geometry, right? I've already created an extrusion for that, so I can just unspress to get my cut. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk about is the ability to copy sketch entities, right? So I could come back to my sketch and I could grab the entities, right? And with a simple Control-C and Control-V, I can copy and paste the entities, right? It's a very powerful way to duplicate geometry around your parts. And it's not just within the same sketch. It's stored in the clipboard and then you can reuse it wherever you want. So I could paste it in another sketch. I could create a sketch right there and paste the logo in this new sketch. Right? I could even paste it in a separate document if I wanted. It's very, very flexible. And notice that it comes with the dimensions, right? The dimensions that I previously defined, so I can still modify its size. For example, I could say maybe I want 25 here. And if you have internal constraints within your sketch, they will also remain there. So a very powerful tool and a very powerful way to duplicate geometry and not have to do rework. Let's come back to the slides and let's continue now with our next topic. Next topic is collaboration. And if I had only one sentence to summarize what collaboration in Onshape is, I would say that Onshape allows you to collaborate with others in ways that no other CAD system can provide. And this is really because Onshape was built from the ground up as a cloud-native application with a database architecture that facilitates collaboration. And when I say collaboration, I mean collaboration with your engineering team, across departments, with your vendors, with your customers. So I've prepared some tips and tricks that I'm sure you will find very interesting. The first one is linked to current state. It's a powerful link sharing option to share more effectively to new view-only users that have no experience of Onshape and actually don't know where and how to access the data. And as its name implies, it's the ability to create a link to the current state of the active tab. And by current state, I mean active configuration, render mode, exploded view, panel states, and even more. So let's have a look at that. Let's assume that I want to share some specific data with a view-only user, right? Let's say someone from the marketing team that doesn't have any experience with Onshape. So what I want to do is share a specific configuration with them, right? I can change the blade length, for example, to start with. I can also change the number of blades. Let's say that I want 2 blades. I could change the number of cylinder holes. So let's say that I want 5 or 6 cylinder holes. And with the parametric replicate, of course, the number of screws updates. So it's really nice as well. Maybe I want to add some ribs just by checking this rib checkbox right there. And now that I've set up my configurations, let's define a display state. Maybe I don't want to see all the parts, right? Maybe I want to hide the cylinder sleeve. So I can activate my hidden cylinder sleeve display state, and it's going to remove my part, of course. Maybe I want them to see the exploded view as well. And I want them to be able to see the bill of material. So I could activate my bill of material as well. Let's add another column to this BOM and maybe add the material property, because probably they need this, right? Once everything is set up, I can select the copy link icon at the top next to the document name and share it with whoever I want. So let me open another window and see what happens if I share this link with someone. So let's paste the link. And as you would expect, of course, the UI is going to be the exact same. It's going to be, of course, the exact same configuration that we are looking at. And the exploded view and the BOM, of course, are right there, right? And this person didn't have to do anything to access this data, right? No need to download or install any viewer. He can just click on the link and the model shows up in the browser, right? And with the needed information on top of that. So again, this link sharing option is a very efficient way to convey the right information to the right person. And you will spend much less time training the new view-only users on where and how to access the data, right? So let's go back to the slides. And actually, my last trick for today is about following mode. And I'm sure most of you already know what the following mode is and use it regularly, but do you know how far you can go with it? Right? I personally discovered very cool functionalities recently that I never thought possible. So I would like to share those with you today. So let's jump back into Onshape, move over to another document. I have a very nice boxer engine for this demo. Quick bonus tip for you here, you can isolate components while the animation is running. You can even hide the transparent part with this checkbox right there. And Michael also showed you that you can make some part transparent while the animation is running. And yeah, just wanted to refresh on that because it looks very, very cool. But let's focus on the following mode. Of course, if you want to follow someone, you need first to share the document with him. So for this demo, I've shared the document with Dave, one of my colleagues. So let me bring over his screen on the right. You can see that I'm logged in as Dave on the right, and we are both working on the same document. And you can tell that because my social clue is showing up right there. Now, to start following me, Dave only needs to double click on my social clue. And from that moment on, everything I'm doing is going to see that live. So the first thing I could do, for example, is turn the perspective on, right? And of course, if I do that, both screens are going to update live. I could also use the named views to quickly change the orientation of the model. It could be very useful during a design review, for example. So I could activate my Onshape Live 2022 view. And another thing that you can do with that is section views. So if you want to show something internal to the assembly, for example, you could create a section view, and then you can drag this arrow and have this dynamic section view update live on both screens. Let's define a precise value here. I could even add another section plane here if I wanted to, just by selecting this part, for example. And again, Dave can see that live, right? Another tip that I discovered recently is the ability to run interference detection analysis while following someone. So let me show you that. I could, of course, activate this interference detection tool. I can pick the top level assembly for the analysis. And you will see that Dave instantly sees the result on his screen, right? I could even have a look at the list and pick and show him a specific interference in the list, right? So it's very, very interactive. And it doesn't stop there, right? The following mode is also picking up on render options. So let me show you that with this cooling fan here. Let's activate the perspective again, because I really like to work with perspective. And let's try different render options like curvature visualization, for example. I could change the number of stripes here. And then let's try another one. Let's try shaded with hidden edges. So the point here, of course, it's going to update on both screens. So my point here is that this tool is much more powerful than what you might think and what I thought, actually. You can actually do a lot of things while you are following someone. You can do interference detection. You can activate different render modes. You can use named views, section views. So very powerful tool that I encourage you to try and to push, right? Let's move back to the slides and actually to my last slide. CAD fearlessly, right? I think that describes Onshape pretty well. You can CAD fearlessly with Onshape, no installation, no files, no IT overhead. Your CAD data can be accessed and edited from anywhere and on any device, because CAD is now where you are, not where your workstation is, right? You have a lot more freedom with Onshape. With Onshape, you can also innovate, you can try things. And I like to say that Onshape is like a time machine, right? You can make mistakes without worrying too much because you can always come back in time to a previous state. And I think this is gold, especially for agile companies that need to innovate quickly and make better products. You will never lose data in Onshape, and you can collaborate in ways that no other CAD system can provide, as we just saw. So my tip here is to take risk, is to get creative, because with Onshape, you can CAD fearlessly. So I hope you learned something today. It's really the purpose of this presentation, helping you to optimize the way you design in Onshape. And of course, Michael and I want to say thank you for joining, and we are now open to answer any questions you might have.
Exactly. Thank you very much. So in the meantime, I had a look at the chat while you're speaking. So there are some questions. There's just a little time left, but we can for sure cover some of these questions. So one of the questions was about the internet speed. I'll take that one. So because everything is run in the browser, so we're streaming data all the time. So what is the required internet speed is the question. And the correct answer is we are not a streaming service. We are not on Netflix where you stream data all the time or something like that. So the internet traffic is really low. So you don't need a super fast bandwidth. It works on it works on every device, and it works even sometimes here in Austria where I live. Sometimes on the mountains I just have 3G connections, and you can open your model and once you're in the cable car going skiing or something like that, and just press the release button because you are the approver or something. So it's not taking any file, it's not downloading files. I mean, we don't have files at all, but it's not downloading any files to your local hard drive or so compared to on-premise systems. So therefore you just really, we stick to web standards, and you don't need a high internet bandwidth at all. All right, well, leads to the next question here. Do we have an offline mode? And I will cover this as well. So of course, no, because it's a full cloud, 100% cloud service. So the platform is hosted on a server, and you need consistent internet connection, of course, to this server. So what happens if the internet connection, you lose internet connection or so? So if I take the train from here to Vienna, there is a tunnel, and I know exactly that I lose internet connection at this tunnel, but I'm not sitting there using Onshape in the train and looking outside of the window. Is this tunnel coming? So it doesn't really matter. Just the window grays out. If you lose internet connection, nothing happens really. If the internet connection comes back, you don't lose any data, so you never have any data loss in Onshape, and you just can carry on working even during a sketcher, so if the internet traffic comes back. So that's it. Well, another question was about 3D file export formats. You want to take that, Paul?
Yeah, of course. So the short answer is yes. We can export to STL, for example, and that would be what you could use for 3D printing. So we can export to a lot more file formats, but STL would be the one for 3D printing. Yeah.
All right. Well, the last question, I guess this is all the time we have. So is there, do we have surfacing capabilities? Because I haven't seen anything in the toolbar. That's correct. So of course we have surfacing capabilities. I want to point out to the session, another breakout session with Track, the bike company, where they talk about surfacing. So the reason probably why you haven't found it is if you press one of those features like extrude or rotate or something like that, you always can make the decision if this should be a solid feature or a surfacing feature. But yes, of course, it's there.
Yeah, well, I just want to add something here. Is maybe you don't see it because it's hidden. It's usually when you, for example, you open an extrude, you want to create an extrude feature, you have always have the option within the feature itself. So that's probably why the question was asked.
Exactly. I think that's all the time we have, Paul. Well, it was a pleasure to do that with you, really. And I want to say thank you. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of Onshape Live 22.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.